I'm Marvin Fertel, the President and CEO of the Nuclear Energy Institute, and I want to thank you all for being here. And I'll also mention this is the first year that we're webcasting this briefing, and I'll just say hello to everybody out there on the web. We're going to talk today about the status and outlook for nuclear energy. And at NEI and across the nuclear energy industry, we have two major imperatives. Our first imperative, and it's always been there, is to maintain and increase the asset value of our 104 operating plants, which means to us operating them at world-class levels of safety and reliability, and to create new earnings potential by building new nuclear capacity when business conditions support new construction. Our second imperative is to ensure that we maintain and grow the capability to build new nuclear power plants in the future, and that we maintain U.S. leadership in this technology. Since we won't build large numbers of new nuclear plants in America in the near term, that means we must capture a significant share of a growing world market. We'll cover both imperatives this morning, and I'll close with some thoughts about politics, policy, and priorities going forward, and then open it up for questions, which for me is the best part of this briefing, to be honest. Although 2011 was a challenging year for the nuclear energy industry in the United States and certainly around the world, any challenges faced by industry pale by comparison with the human cost of the March 11th tsunami in Japan. From the narrow perspective of the U.S. nuclear industry, although last year was a challenge, and although we'll be incorporating the lessons learned from Fukushima for several more years, 2011 was not the largest challenge the U.S. nuclear industry has ever faced. We've experienced business challenges before. Remember the 1992 Energy Policy Act, which mandated wholesale competition and open access to the transmission system. Our average capacity factor that year was 70.9%. The common wisdom held that nuclear plants would not survive the transition to competitive electricity markets. In the mid-1990s, the Energy Information Administration predicted that 1/2 of U.S. nuclear capacity would shut down prematurely. But the prospect of competition was a powerful tonic. Nuclear plant performance started to improve. American utilities started benchmarking aggressively against the best in class here in the United States and around the world. Capacity factors rose, and we now are at world-class levels for at least the last decade. Then came restructuring in the late 90s. Many thought that nuclear plants would sink under the weight of stranded costs. That was wrong too. Nuclear power in America actually benefited from restructuring. Integrated companies in restructured states divested their generating capacity, including their nuclear units. That led to some consolidation, more nuclear plants in the hands of fewer larger companies with the resources and bench strength to operate them exceptionally well. For 10+ years, the U.S. fleet has operated at sustained high levels of reliability and safety, and last year was no exception. As you can see, capacity factors year over year range from the high 80s to the low 90s. We estimate last year's average capacity factor was a shade under 89%. Output was down slightly from 2010, which was a record year, hardly surprising since we had 11 more refueling outages than the year before. Mother Nature threw her worst at a number of our stations. A tornado hit Surrey plant in April. Later that month, tornadoes raked TVA's surface territory, killing 330 people, damaged 337 transmission structures, and knocked out most of the off-site power to the Browns Ferry nuclear plant. In June, Missouri River flooding turned the Fort Calhoun and Cooper nuclear stations in Nebraska into islands. And in August, the North Anna plant experienced an earthquake which exceeded the plant's design basis. And a few days later, Hurricane Irene rolled up the East Coast, affecting 24 of our plants, with little to show for it save some damage to one switch yard. In all cases, the plants did what they were designed to do. They maintained safety. The plants and the people performed as expected, exceptionally well. The industry also continues to invest in long-term safety and reliability at our reactors. The license renewal process continued to move smoothly with a few notable exceptions. The Pilgrim license renewal application has lingered for over 6 years at the NRC, and the Indian Point renewals are taking longer than they should, even though NRC staff technical reviews are complete and found no concerns about continued safe operation through the renewal period at both sites. Some power uprates have been deferred until market conditions improve, but NRC licensing for uprates is proceeding for those companies that chose to move forward. And we continue to invest in the operating plants to preserve their asset value and to position them to operate beyond 40 years and to incorporate new requirements and upgrades to maintain the highest levels of safety. We don't have 2011 data yet, but the industry invested $7 billion in capital in the plants in 2010. On a per gigawatt basis, that's the highest in the world and approximately twice what France has invested, for example. 70% of our CapEx was to replace steam generators, vessel heads, and other aging equipment, and for power uprates. Remember, we placed these 104 plants in service in a relatively short period of time, so we expect to experience these periodic peaks in CapEx requirements. Let me turn now to Fukushima and where we stand on our response to the accident. Our objectives are quite clear. These may seem obvious to you, but it's often a useful discipline to articulate clear and simple objectives. First, and always first, we must maintain our focus on safe operation. Second, we must identify those actions that provide the greatest safety benefit and implement them first. We have analytical tools that allow us to identify where and how we obtain the greatest safety benefit, and we will use them. And finally, we must always remember that our primary goal is to prevent fuel damage and preserve containment integrity. Those are our compass points. Our response to Fukushima builds on a strong base. The U.S. nuclear industry is somewhat unique among nuclear operators around the world in the extent to which we've already planned for these types of events and made the capital investments necessary to maintain a high level of readiness. We're in general agreement with the NRC on what should be addressed, although in some cases we may differ over how and when. We expect NRC to employ a variety of tools, regulatory tools, to address Fukushima-related issues. We expect orders requiring strategies to maintain core cooling during an extended loss of AC power, additional instrumentation for use fuel pools, and reliable and readily available hardened vents in specific reactor designs. The NRC will also require licensees to provide detailed information on a number of topics: inspections to verify protection against seismic and flooding hazards, updated evaluations of the hazards associated with earthquakes, floods, and other external events, power supplies for communication systems used for emergency response activities, and assessment of emergency response staffing levels. The NRC staff has indicated they will issue these orders and requests in early March. The timing and implementation requirements will be determined over the next few months. Some of these areas, such as updating analysis of seismic and flooding issues and physical modifications to the plants, will take several years to complete.